All right, we are looking at Kant. We're still in the middle of the sausage grinder. We've kind of worked our way through some of the features of it, including the nozzles, which stand for what, Jordan? The nozzles are?
The nozzles are pure intuitions.
And what are they in particular, the two of them? The pure intuitions, according to Kant, are?
Space and time.
Space and time. That these are intuitions of the mind, not necessarily descriptive of the external world at all, about which we know nothing. Percepts are what flow in. Talked about that. Concepts are these categories within the mind into which the percepts are sorted. And I gave you the 12 categories, and that's about where we left off last time.
We have hit the three.
Oh, did I not make it through? Modality. All right. Okay, so we made it through relation. Did we get through that?
Yes.
Substance accidents, causality, dependence. I don't think I said much about that. Community and interaction. These are all intuitive, or these are all categories in the mind by which we interpret percepts. And the last one, modality, possibility or impossibility. Read into that, for Kant, the law of non-contradiction. We have in our heads a notion that something cannot both be true and not true in the same time in the same sense. Called the law of contradiction or the law of non-contradiction. And it's one of the principal, foundations upon which we think reason must proceed. I cannot reason about anything if I don't at least have in my head the notion that I can't have both a truth be true and its opposite be false. So when he talks about possibility and impossibility, he really means something like that, the law of non-contradiction. But he says it's something in my mind again. It doesn't necessarily. Who knows whether that can be true in the external world? Maybe in the external world you can have A and non-A at the same time, same sense. But I know that in my mind I can't, reason that way. The next pair is existence, non-existence, which is very similar. But he says a category in my mind is that something exists, something is. I have a notion of existence, of some kind of state of being. And I have another notion of something not existing. That these are ways in which I think about the percepts that come in. I think about maybe A exists and B does not exist. It's just a way of interpreting this data. And the necessity contingency is something like causation. I think of things as being dependent, contingent, or being independent. I don't want to worry you too much about those, because to talk about them in greater detail is more than I want to spend on it. But just have the idea in your head that these are, for Kant, most importantly, ways I interpret my experience rather than descriptions of the way the world actually is, about which we know very little.
So with that, now if you don't want to get into this, that's fine. But with the non-existence, how can we know if something doesn't exist? Because it could exist outside of our mind. So
it is not even a matter of whether it exists. You're still living in the pre-Copernican world, according to Kant. You're thinking about whether something actually exists out there, and actually we have no clue whether it exists out there. Existence itself is a category of the mind. I interpret my percepts based on a notion of something existing.
how can you have something non-existent in your mind?
Well, it's just another way of thinking about my experience. I can think about you existing, and I can also think about you non-existing. I mean, the very fact that I can assert your existence means I can at least think about you not existing, you see. It's just a way of thinking, really.
Okay.
But don't confuse this. He's not talking about whether things really exist or not. That's not the issue. This is the way my mind interprets experience. And I interpret it in part according to the idea, does something exist? I think I'm describing the external world. I'm not, Kant says. That's just the way my mind operates. All right. Now, I'm going through this fairly rapidly. You need to understand he spends chapters on this kind of stuff. You know, page after page. Kant is the first guy in the history of philosophy who really would be considered, I suppose, a professional philosopher. And what that means is that he has to come up with language that the rest of us don't understand. That's how you can tell you're a professional. You say something simple, but you say it in such a convoluted way that nobody understands what in the world you're talking about. And then you put a badge on yourself and say, therefore I'm a professional. You know. And you've got to take 38 classes from me and learn all my special jargon before you have a clue about what my message is. Everybody up until Kant, I mean everybody, Hume, even Hume, certainly Locke. I mean, you guys read Locke last year and a little bit this year. Didn't you read Locke this year? Did you read Locke this year? A little bit? Maybe not. Maybe I did. Did I give you some Locke? Anyway, everybody up until this point, Plato, Aristotle, you know, all of these guys, Augustine, you as an ordinary mortal can read them and go, yeah, I kind of get what he's saying. I may agree, I may not agree, but hey, at least I kind of get it. You can read Berkeley and you can kind of figure it out. You work at it. You read Kant and you go, what? What is this? It's just jargon, complicated, special words, technical kind of phrases that you just think, I don't have a clue. So the only way to really read Kant, to make sense of him, is to go become a philosophy major somewhere and learn the special jargon. Then you can read him, and then you can consider yourself a very smart person. Well, Kant's the first guy in history who really would be considered a professional philosopher. And that's part of what's difficult about him. So you can be very grateful that I'm not having you read any Kant. Let's hear it for Gore. He's not having you read Kant, because you would never forgive me if I did make you read any of him. But you may, if you go off to college and take certain courses, have to read him. And I want you to have some idea what the lay of the land is and something of familiarity with some of the jargon that he uses. All right. What for Kant is knowledge? Knowledge is the synthesis of percepts and concepts. That's all it is. Percepts are flowing in, coming from who knows where. Concepts are sorting the percepts. And what happens when I sort the percepts into the concepts in my mind, what is produced by that is what we commonly call knowledge. Yes?
Was there one more for modality, pure existence and non-existence?
Necessity, there's three. All of these are in little triads. And so the three for modality were possibility, impossibility, existence, non-existence, and necessity, contingency. Okay? And by the way, for test purposes, what might I ask you? I will not ask you to tick off the 12 categories. I might very well ask you to tick off the 4 classes. The classes are quantity, quality, relation, modality. Let's give you something to remember from our little discussion here. So, what I'm saying is knowledge is the combination. Right now, standing up in front of you wearing my Valentine sweater, and so you're getting an impression of red. You've also got, color of face, hair up here, kind of gray, a little bit of brown in there. you've got, some skin color out here, you've got whatever other things. All of this is just flowing into your consciousness as so many percepts. It's disorganized, it's random, it's not, in terms of how it's hitting you, a teacher or any of the other thing. It's just a combination of colors and noises. Because I am, among other things, making noise right now, you see. And there's some motion going on. You're seeing me gesticulating and doing stuff to try to keep you half awake and so on. All of this is flowing in. And then, in here, all of those percepts are flowing into little jars. And one of the jars is saying, oh, I'm experiencing something, therefore something out there must exist. Now, what is it that exists? Well, and you put the red into something, and the red sort of starts thinking, well, it must be a sweater, and and so on. And pretty soon, and you do all this rapidly, you do it intuitively, you're not even aware of it. But what comes out of this process, I'll put it out here, but it's actually in here, is some idea of, I'm just going to say, teacher. Okay? There is a object, and you assign a label to it and call it teacher, let's say. That's knowledge. Now, it's pretty simple knowledge. It's not overly complex, but that is a piece of information. There is a teacher in the room talking to me, and in fact trying to teach. And all of these are things that your mind has basically produced by organizing the percepts. And Kant doesn't know. And he would say you don't know if there's actually anything out there at all. Because your knowledge of teacher depends heavily on what you are doing with raw percepts that are flowing in. And the raw percepts don't necessarily mean teacher at all. They are just noises and colors. So, a little quote from Kant. You might want to jot this down. Percepts without concepts are blind. Concepts without percepts are empty. Percepts without concepts are blind. Concepts without percepts are empty. All right. Out the bottom, this is the bottom nozzle. This is where all whatever sausage comes out. This is the last point of the sausage grinder, but it's so important it becomes our fourth Kant and 6 Easy lesson. So I'm going to make this a separate point. But the term that goes at the bottom here is the term consciousness. This is your sense of yourself as a self experiencing all of this. That's what's flowing out. That razor edge of time continuing, in which you are aware of yourself in this ongoing continuum of self-knowledge and experiential knowledge. Now, the term consciousness, of course, is much too simple. When I say that to you, you immediately know what I'm saying. So we have to give you Kant's phrase for consciousness, and this is just one of 1,000 that gives you a flavor for how he uses this kind of thing. So his term for consciousness is the transcendental apperception of the ego. And I do want you to know that. The transcendental apperception of the ego. Transcendental spelled like transcendental. Apperception spelled like perception with an AP in front of it. And ego spelled like ego. Now each of these words is important. And we'll start with the first of them, the word transcendental. And I don't know any better way to say this than just to give it to you sort of pedantically and have you write it down, then we'll talk about it. The word transcendental is intended to communicate this idea. It is that which underlies human knowledge, but which is itself unknowable. That which underlies human knowledge, but is in itself unknowable. With respect to my self-consciousness, it would say something like this. I'm aware of my existence. I'm aware of it. But I am not able to perceive that which is doing the perceiving. I'm aware that I'm perceiving you, I'm perceiving this room. I'm having an experience, an ongoing experience of perception, but I cannot turn back on myself and perceive the perceiver. I can't flip my eyeballs over in my head and look back into myself and say, oh, there I am. But I know I must be there. You know. I can't perceive myself, but it's almost impossible for me to even do the most minimal type of thinking unless I assume I'm there. I've got to be there. So it's a transcendental thing because this is behind that which I am experiencing. In other words, it's got to be there in order to make sense out of what I am in fact experiencing, namely these perceptions. I say to myself, I'm perceiving. I'm experiencing something. Fantasia. I can't turn around and look at this that is the perceiver, but I cannot resist the idea that there is something there doing the perceiving. You have the same problem. You cannot look back on yourself, but you all are assuming you're there in this experience of. And that's what he means by transcendental. Transcendental is something that you just intuitively know must be there, but you can't prove it, you can't demonstrate it, you can't see it. There's nothing you can do to actually have rational confidence about it, but without it, everything else falls apart. This is the fundamental idea of a transcendental approach to anything. You in apologetics, I don't know, have you come across the so-called transcendental argument for the existence of God? Have you come across that? Bonson, the presuppositional apologists, have liked it. Is that new? You in apologetics? Who's in apologetics in this room? Okay, you haven't had it. All right. Well, anyway, this is where it starts. This is where that whole approach to dealing with the notion of the existence of God transcendentally starts. It's a Kantian argument, you know. Okay, it's apperception, not perception. If I could perceive the ego, then it would be perception, but it wouldn't be transcendental. The very fact that it's transcendental means that it's something that is prior to perception. It is, to use Kant's idea, the ground of perception. Without it, there could be no perception. And in this case, it is the transcendental apperception of the ego, of myself. He applies it elsewhere, but this is the first place. This is his whole notion of the self. But it really calls into question whether there truly is a self, you see, because really all we've got are percepts sorted in, flowing out, and this, if you can just imagine something constantly flowing out the bottom of this thing, a constant, never-ending stream of sausage. And that is your ongoing experience of life, of, every conversation you have, every Valentine you get, every thing that's happening in your life, all of these things are just this ongoing flow of sausage coming out the bottom of that machine. And you never quite know for sure if the ego is really there, because all that's happening is something is sort of like being tickled by this flow of sausage. But what is that that's being tickled? What is that? I don't know. I realize it sounds pretty bizarre the way I'm describing it. But Kant is pretty bizarre, I have to say. All right. That's the sausage grinder. That's the third and fourth of the easy lessons with Kant. This is probably the most complicated part of it. It's the most difficult, I think, to get. In terms of what I'm going to talk about, there's more complicated aspects to Kant, but this will give you a flavor for it. Brings us to point number 5. So what do we have? We have the country kitchen. The Copernican revolution was one, the country kitchen, the sausage grinder, which is actually 2 of these points. The sausage grinder is point 3. Point 4 is the sausage flowing out of the sausage grinder, which is your consciousness, to wit, transcendental apperception of the ego. 5th point, 5th easy lesson of Kant, is you live in a house that has an upstairs. Okay? You live in a 2-storied house, and there's a sense in which you live downstairs, but you know somehow there's an upstairs. So we're just going to call this the 2-storied house. Downstairs in our house here. Nice front door. Tulips out in front because you're all Calvinists, of course. I'm not teaching you that. Smoke coming out of it. All right. You live in this house, and there's an upstairs. The difficulty is you can never get up there. It's sort of like this feeling that there's something strange upstairs. If you live in an old house, I grew up in an old house in Grand Coulee. It had an attic. Whew, fun. Attics are fun because they're spooky if they're uninhabited, but you know that there's just stuff up there. Over the years, people have taken stuff, hauled it up there. You got suitcases, you got trunks, you got bags, you got spiders and spider webs and probably other more scary things than that. And so it's kind of a scary place to go. And you always sort of suspect that if you open one of those trunks or something surprising and maybe a little frightening may reach out and grab you and drag you into the trunk and you'll never be heard from again. You ever had thoughts like that? See, you guys live in nice houses in Spokane. You have to live somewhere out in the boonies a little bit, in an old house, to really appreciate this. Well, here's the deal. You live in a house, and the problem is there is no stairway that gets you upstairs. There's no trap door, there's no ladder, there's no access. It's just a big mystery land. And you have this deep, abiding suspicion that something is up there. but you just don't know how to get there. He calls that mystery land the noumenal. Noumenal fundamentally means mystery. Yeah. And then he says where we all live, however, is downstairs in the level of the house that is not called noumenal, but is called what? What's the term? Go ahead, Sydney.
I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's phenomenal.
Just phenomenal, yeah, phenomenal. Now, usually the first time students encounter this, we've talked about it before a little bit, they hear the word phenomenal and they think of something like the 4th of July, fireworks, loud noises, and kind of exciting experiences. That's not the way it's used philosophically. The word phenomenal does not mean phenomenal, as in, wow, that was a phenomenal shot you made from half court to win the game. That's phenomenal to be sure, but that's not what's intended here. Phenomenal simply means phenomena, and phenomena is referring to this machine that's operating. You are experiencing this transcendental apperception of the ego, this ongoing sense of consciousness, of perception, this continuity of your experience of yourself. All of that is what we would call your consciousness, and that is all phenomena. The problem is, the phenomena in itself seem to require an explanation. The phenomena are not self-sufficient, according to Kant. He believes that we really can't quite make heads or tails out of what's going on unless something up here, which is invisible and mysterious, is there to explain it. And so he puts 3 things upstairs that he says must be there, but we can't see them, we can't prove them, we can't access them, we can't go up and take a look at a trunk and find them, we can't prove them, but somehow we know they've got to be there. And those 3 things are what? You can tell me the 3 things. Who reported on Kant? Was that you? It was Sarah. That's right, how could I forget? Do you remember, Sarah, what he says in the phenomenal level? Yeah, I was very happy, though, when you said, what was it you said that I was so excited? Oh, the Copernican revolution. That was very good, yeah. But can't tell me this. Okay, anybody? You actually should know this because I actually said this to you. And I told you, when we were studying a prior philosopher, that these ideas would come back in Kant. And that we would have to deal with them then. So I said, make a little note. This is going to be a future discussion. And what was it? Anybody? Spencer? Furiously, you found it? I'll give you a hint. It was during our discussion of Hume. Those are good notes, Matthew. Are those your notes? That's nice. That's good. Don't throw those away. Don't shred those. Anybody? It was under Hume. You got it?
Self, God, and things.
Exactly. Okay, remember that? Did you find it? All right, here it is. In the phenomenal world, Kant says there have got to be these 3 things that you remember Hume said are non-demonstrable. What did I say? Oh, I'm sorry. Noumenal. I misspoke. Scratch that from the record. In the noumenal. Thank you for catching me. I want to try to speak accurately. Hume said that there are 3 things that we cannot demonstrate. We cannot demonstrate God, we cannot demonstrate self, we cannot demonstrate things, the essences of things, or things in themselves. And so that's what Kant says. He agrees. He puts them up here. God, self, and what he called the Denk an sich, or the thing in itself, I'm just going to call it things. But please understand what I mean by that are things in the external world. I'm looking at Matthew's pen, but actually all that's happening to me right now is a little collection of percepts. And those are filtering into me, and I'm sorting them into the 12 jars, and I'm concluding, pen. It's knowledge. You know? It's about the way my brain operates. It's going so I have knowledge. But you see, the knowledge is actually something in here. The knowledge is something down here. And I cannot know for sure if up in the attic there actually is a pen. Because what I have is simply a phenomenon of pen. And whether there's a Dakon Zeke, whether there's a pen in itself, whether there's something out there in some universe external to me remains mysterious. But, Kant says, even though I cannot prove it, there's got to be something out there. This is his response really to Hume. Hume just leaves us in a state of complete skepticism. Kant says, yeah, but there's got to be something upstairs. There's got to be something in the attic. Else all these perceptions down here, cannot be explained. It's transcendental in the sense that I cannot prove it, but I am driven to assume it. If I don't assume it, then I just lapse into complete insanity. Go ahead. Yeah.
So would Kant say, like, in terms of the pen, that what it actually is in the noumenal category, or we don't even know if that has an existence in the noumenal?
We don't know for sure if there's anything out there in the noumenal at all. Maybe it's a hologram. Maybe it's just some sort of strange stimulation I'm getting from some unknown environment, and I think it's a pen. Who knows? But he's saying there's got to be something out there. He's not sure it is a pin. He doesn't know for sure what it is, but he believes there's got to be something out there. He also believes that there must be a self to perceive the pin, and he also importantly believes there must be God. The odd thing about Kant is he believes he is rescuing God from Hume. You see, he's trying to help God out. Because, of course, Hume has basically destroyed our conviction that there's a God, left us in a state of skepticism, wondering if there's any deity at all, and Kant comes along and says, here I come to save the day, and flies in, to give us back give us back God. I'm not sure he made the distinction very cleanly, but he wants to give us back God. Please note this, he's not giving us back God the way Aquinas would, by saying, well, okay, I can start applying science down here, and by the application of rational principle, I can conclude, going up the ladder, that if this is down here, then there must be God up there. I can reach God at the end of a syllogism that demands that God must exist. If there is motion, if there is this, if there is that, then there must be God, That's kind of the way Aquinas reasons, so that God is actually rationally demonstrable using reason, not for Kant. Reason can't get there. The Kantian view, and this is a good line to catch, you cannot reason from the finite to the infinite. You can only reason from the finite to the finite. And God is not finite. God can never be the conclusion of any argument. You can never find God at the end of any syllogism that proceeds on the basis of pure reason. There is an infinite chasm that separates the phenomenal from the noumenal. That ceiling that separates the upper story from the lower story becomes so important in Kant, it gets a special name. It's called Kant's wall. We should have called it Kant's ceiling, because it's actually, in a sense, the upstairs that we're not able to access. But if you take philosophy one of these days, the chances are quite good that you'll hear the professor mention Kant's wall. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about something on the other side of the wall that Kant believes must be there to account for what I'm experiencing at the phenomenal level, but there's no way I can prove it. I have to be fundamentally skeptical with respect to pure reason as to whether anything's over there at all. This was the fundamental argument in his book, Critique of Pure Reason. Pure reason has its limits. He is critiquing reason itself. What is reason not able to do? 1, show that there's a God. 2, show that there's a self. 3, show that there's an external universe. Reason can do none of it. Reason works very nicely in the world of these fruit jars in my brain. Works fine there. But if I try to ask what's outside, filling up those fruit jars, where are those percepts coming from? Can't know. Now, Kant says, if we cannot have certainty about God, about self, and about the thing in itself, then there are 3 academic disciplines that go out the door, and we shouldn't bother with them anymore. I stated that poorly, and let me correct it this way. There are 3 traditional beliefs that have to go. They represent disciplines, but it'd be more accurate to say this. So, if these 3 things cannot be demonstrated, then there are 3 beliefs, traditional beliefs, that have to go. So let me ask you, in terms of an academic discipline, we'll start on the top. Josiah, if we cannot know for sure that there is God, then what academic discipline or traditional belief has to go?
Theology.
Theology has to go. Now this is a little bit more subtle, but I'll ask Stephen the question. If we cannot have any certainty of the objective reality of self, then there is a traditional belief that has to go. I'm not going to call it a discipline, because that would be misleading, but there is a traditional belief about ourselves that disappears if we cannot have certainty about the self. You have any idea what he would say, what would go in the blank there? This is not an easy question. But,
Psychology.
well, psychology is certainly the natural reaction. Oddly enough, the 19th century was really the birth of psychology, but it was the birth of, in terms of who Stephen is the great sort of innovator of psychology in the 19th century. His name is Freud. And Freud would repudiate the thing that I want to put in this blank. Freud would say, as Kant would say, that if you cannot know about the self for sure, you cannot have in this blank. Anybody want to take a stab at it? Go ahead, Ben.
Axiology.
Axiology, he actually gets there in a sense, but this is a step in that direction. So you've reached a conclusion further down there. Okay, here's what goes. Freedom. Freedom. Now, please understand, he's not saying, what he's saying is that what we know about God is nothing, and therefore there's no point in doing theology. What we know about the self is nothing, and therefore we cannot study freedom. Freedom is not a subject of inquiry. You see. Hopefully this will make a little more sense. If we cannot have any certainty about things, then, I'll help you out with this one, then what goes is any notion of laws of nature, such as you would find in someone like Locke. Locke believes there's laws of nature. You know that, natural law. Locke believes that the universe operates according to fixed principles. Blackstone says the same thing. We looked at Blackstone last year, didn't we? This law of nature being coeval with mankind and dictated by God himself is of course superior in obligation to any other, right? It is binding over all the globe at all times. You remember all that? You learned that at some point along the line? Kant says, no way. That's laws of nature, and laws of nature are built into the external world. And if we don't know anything about the things, then we certainly can't talk about the laws by which the things operate. See the problem? So these go. If you think about religion, I'm sorry, I just gave it away. What an idiot. What discipline replaces theology? Anybody know? I keep wanting to help you guys out. What is it? Trevor, what discipline replaces theology?
Philosophy?
No. What is it? Avery, what did I just say?
I think you said it.
Oh, did you say it?
Religion.
Religion. What's the difference between the study of theology and the study of religion? Joe, any idea? What's the difference between the study of theology and the study of religion? Well, what is the study of theology? It's the study of?
It's the study of God.
Yes. The study of religion is the study of?
Would it be, more worldview?
It could be. There's a simpler answer than that. Okay, get this. The study of theology is the study of God. The study of religion is the study of man. Religion really is a topic under anthropology. Anthropology. Religion is the study of human behavior with respect to human beliefs about God, but it's not the study of God. I see you there in my peripheral vision, and I'm not going to forget. There was a time, about the turn of the century, just make a note of this. This is beginning to describe your world. Kant died, roughly, pushing 1800, a little earlier than that. By the time you get to the mid to late 1800s, the schools of theology in the United States had changed their department names from schools of theology to schools of religion. They had religion departments, not theology departments, including my beloved Whitworth. When I first went to Whitworth College in 1967, it had a department of religion. Much to his credit, Dr. James Edwards, who's a wonderful scholar, fought to reinstate the proper title for the department. Now they have a department of theology. That's very recent. You know why they had a department of religion? Not theology? Because of Kant. Kant changed the game in American education, even in terms of Christian education, and put religion where theology used to be. Why? Because we can't do theology. We can't get there from here. We can't know anything about God. All we can know about is how people respond to ideas about God. You see the difference? One is anthropocentric, one is theocentric, and we got rid of one and put in the other. That's Kant. Well, Whitworth is in a radical minority. You go to a lot of Christian colleges across the country, you'll find still departments of religion. We are still living very much under the shadow of Kant, even to this day. Because there's a despair. Because God's upstairs. And you can't reason from the finite to the infinite. Critique of Pure Reason shows that reason cannot get up there and look at God. You know. What happens in terms of self, you start getting psychology, Freud and others, and virtually every system of psychology, virtually everyone denies freedom and reduces you to a machine which can be studied phenomenologically. Freud did it. Carl Jung did it. The whole history of psychology has been to try to put you, a human self, under a microscope and explain you mechanistically. See. When I was a psych major at Whitworth in the 60s, the paradigm for psychology at that point was B.F. Skinner, who was a behaviorist. And his entire idea of how you understand human behavior is in terms of conditioning. No freedom, no choices, no morality, just conditioning. You are the product of your conditioning. Well, that's really the history of psychology. Psychology comes as a Kantian response to a despair that we actually have freedom. And unfortunately, friends, I'd like to get to the third one, but the clock has driven me out once again. So we'll pick that up. Domani.